Capitalism. I hate it. You probably hate it, or hopefully by the end of this video, you will hate it. Overall, pretty inefficient system of economics. Not a great way to organize a society for a multitude of reasons. The chief one we're going to talk about today is commodification. If you've watched the AI art video, you'll know I talked about how AI art was an example of the commodity form and its flaws, and how the commodification of art is really ruining the lives of artists. I felt we should probably go a little bit more in depth into what a commodity is, how it functions in a capitalist society, and the inefficiencies inherent to it. So, what is a commodity? Well, a commodity is a unit of labor. It's a good or service, right, that is traded for some value. And the thing that makes it a good or service is the labor that goes into it. So even if you're just selling bags of rocks that you picked up outside, you had to put the labor into putting those rocks into bags and then selling them. So that unit of labor would be a commodity. Something that is bought and sold, something that is traded, and is a representation of labor. That's what a commodity is. It is also important to know that a commodity is separated from a sense of community. So, in olden times, right, back when people used to live in villages and rely on each other for everything, you knew who the baker was. So it wasn't so much that you just went to the baker and paid for your bread. You would, of course, pay for your bread, but say the baker was talking to you, like, because his name was Fred, and he was a friend of yours. You met each other at the pub every day, right? And he was talking to you, and he was like, man, my garden wasn't that great this year. I didn't get too many tomatoes, right? And you made a lot of tomatoes in your garden. You're like, yeah, Fred, I can get you some tomatoes if you need some tomatoes. You know what I mean? That would be a sense of community within the economic system. People making up for each other's losses within the given year, from each according to their ability to each according to their need. Fred needed some tomatoes, you had some extra tomatoes. That's pretty nice, isn't it? Now, within a capitalist system, once an object is commodified, it no longer has that sense of community. You don't know who baked your bread. You know that Wonder made your bread. You don't know who the fuck picked your tea leaves, but you do know that Lipton tea produced those tea leaves. The commodity has become a ritual object, just something that is, and something that you use. It no longer has a sense of community attached to it. That's something that Karl Marx wrote on a lot. He called it an individual fetish, because that refers to, because the old word fetish refers to both what we can think of as a fetish in the modern day, or a ritual object. Now, with the ritual objects of capitalism being the commodity, there's a couple of flaws to the commodity form. In particular, how it works, like how it fits in with a capitalist perspective, how it fits into a capitalist system. So let's cover that. I've got my MS Paint out here. Very nice. So, how do commodities work in capitalism? We have our boy Frederick, all right? Blue collar working man Frederick, making his loaves of bread, all right? Now, he lives in a capitalist society, so he works at a bread bacon factory under Mr. Moneybags. That's what we're going to call this guy. All right? Give him a little top hat, because all rich people wear top hats. This is known information. Now, Mr. Moneybags owns the factory that Fred works at. Mr. Moneybags has a private contract with Fred that says every day Fred needs to give him one loaf of bread, all right? And Mr. Moneybags, with his infinite pool of wealth, with just an absurd amount of wealth, right, will pay Fred $1, a single dollar for that loaf of bread. You following so far? Now, here is why Mr. Moneybags owns the bread making factory that Fred works in. He is able to take... Oh, shit. He is able to take... I'm going to have to erase this bread, actually. He's able to take that bread... Come on, give me the right thing. After giving the $1 to Fred, he's able to take that loaf of bread and sell it to another working class person, right? This, what we'll call her Georgina. That's her name, Georgina, right? And Georgina pays $2 dues, all right, for that loaf of bread. Now, what we need to notice what's happening here. Fred produced a commodity. He produced the loaf of bread, and the bread's value was $2. The bread's value on the market, the amount that people are paying for it, is $2 dues. But Fred only made $1 due off of producing and selling his bread to Mr. Moneybags. This is known as the extraction of excess value. The commodity that a working class citizen produces for a company is going to be worth more than their wages, because the bourgeois' entire existence is taking the excess value from the commodities that they produce, and by paying less than their labor is worth in wages, to take that excess value and put it in their pocket. That's how the bourgeois live. It is a fundamentally parasitic system, because in a truly free world, Fred would be selling his bread pretty directly, or Fred would be working in a cooperative where he votes for whoever is running the marketing team for that company. And that person would then sell the bread, and they would all share the money, all the workers alongside Fred. Because keep in mind, Fred doesn't work alone. He works with like 40 other guys in the factory, and all of them would share that profit. They would share the worth of their labor. In a capitalist system, Mr. Moneybags just pockets it. That's a pretty glaring flaw. So far, we have an entire class of society that is fundamentally parasitic, that only exists to be a parasite, to be a leech upon the working class. The capitalist lie is that their job is, they made their money through innovation, so their job is to innovate the process, make it so that workers, make it so that the bread is cheaper to produce, make it so that the bread is tastier, so it's worth more money. They, of course, don't do that. The most efficient way for the bourgeois, for Mr. Moneybags, to make money is to reduce the amount of money that he gives to his workers. There is a reason that rich people in the American South fought tooth and nail for slavery. It is a very efficient system for the parasitic wretches of society. When the rich and powerful own society, as they pretty much always do, they're going to fight tooth and nail for slavery. Because slavery is just the most efficient way for a capitalist to produce a commodity. Now, we've covered how the profit incentive, the requirement for a commodity to produce profits for the bourgeois that own the means of production, leads to labor abuse. It reduces. There's, after all, is a reason why workers in the Victorian age didn't give weekends or enforce 16-hour shifts, or had really poor working conditions for the workers, where they'd be stepping through horse shit on their way. There's a reason that all of this was the case. It's cheaper. It's cheaper for the owning class to do that. They don't got to put as much money into good working conditions or a positive workplace environment for their employees. Of course, the extreme of this is slavery. Slavery is like as far as you can go to abuse the working class for your own profits. And of course, the rich and powerful fought tooth and nail for slavery. Now, not only does profit incentives in capitalism help slavers out, or mean that slavers fundamentally will be the ones who are most powerful because they accrue the most capital, but also the nature of capitalism, insofar as it relies on production, means that slavery is pretty easy to get away with even as a big company. What do I mean by that? Well, let's take our good friend, that's not the right one, Apple, all right? Why is my mouse dragging? Fuck. Gotta clean that. Our good friends at Apple, all right? That is such a shitty apple. We'll go with it. uh, so Apple produces tech, right? That's their job as a company. They have a couple of factories that make iPhones, that make Macintoshes, or whatever the fuck they produce. I don't know. They produce the tech. However, they don't produce all of it. They don't produce a lot of the components. Some of the components are made by Samsung, right? So the components are another piece of the vertical pie, right? Those components rely on raw materials. You need raw materials to make the components, after all. And those raw materials need to be refined. So refineries go underneath the components. There's probably a couple of steps that I'm missing here, but whatever. And then underneath refineries would be mining operations, right? The things that the children yearn for. So we have this stack, right? This stack of things that Apple relies on in order to do its business. Keep in mind, Apple is owned by the bourgeois. And fundamentally, the more that they can abuse their workers, the cheaper the commodities are going to be for them to produce. Thus, the higher the profits will be for the company. So Apple, up top here, directly benefits from not having any say in the refineries or the mining process. They have nothing to do with either of those. They might have some say on or they'll have plenty of say on the tech because they directly produce the tech. And they'll probably have some say on the components because they need the components to fit certain standards in order to make a good iPhone. However, they get a lot of money. Stop that cough. They get a lot of money off of "to the best of our knowledge," off of that single phrase. If to the best of their knowledge, effectively, according to legal information that they have, they don't know about slavery happening in the refineries, and they don't know about slavery happening in the mining operations, which it 100% is. These mining operations are happening in third world countries with shitty businesses. There's 100% slavery happening. There's no way in hell it isn't. Every single time we look into these businesses, there's always slavery in the third world. But that slavery means that, where the fuck's my mouse? Means that these two areas on the stack are cheaper. They produce commodities for cheaper and can sell them for cheaper to the big guys up at Apple. So Apple directly knows that slavery is happening underneath its somewhere in the line, because otherwise they wouldn't be getting their commodities for so cheap. However, legally, they don't know a goddamn thing because they don't own those companies. They don't do shit for those companies. They only interact with those companies insofar as purchasing their products. As such, they have a legal loophole and can use slavery. This is part of the reason why leftists will say there's no such thing as ethical consumption under capitalism. And they're entirely right, because there isn't. There is no such thing as ethical consumption under capitalism. Even in the case where a capitalist system has the best possible working conditions for its workers, the bourgeois still exist, and they still rely on being parasitic leeches upon the working class. Even in the best case example of capitalism, it is still unethical. However, we don't live in the best case example of capitalism. We live in the real application of capitalism. And the real application of capitalism has slavery. Because slavery is just what gets the products out the cheapest. Now, was there anything else I wanted to talk about? Right. This is all because of one thing. Fundamentally, all of this, the entire system, the entire shithole of a system of capitalism, is based on one tenet: production for profit. The reason why we produce commodities under capitalist systems is to make profit off of them. That's not how society's economy should be structured. Think of the villages. Think of the individual tribes where people cared for one another, from each according to their ability, to each according to their need. That is how society has pretty much always been structured and should be structured. Production for use, not production for profit. Production for profit fundamentally is an idea that only exists to serve the wealthy and elite, to give them more means, to abuse the working class so that they get more power. We should have an economy structured around humans, around how humans interact, around how humans can best live. And that is not under capitalism. There's a reason why life under capitalism specifically sucks. When the wealthy and powerful know the reasons that they're wealthy and powerful, and also are wealthy and powerful, they have the ability to change society. They structure society to make it as hard as possible to think of another system. This is a tenet known as capitalist realism. There's a really good book on that. I read it a while back. I'm probably going to read it again. I live in the North American suburbs, which is hell, frankly. I grew up, I lived my teens in the suburbs. There's a reason why I've suffered from addiction, especially with like video games. There's nothing else to do. In fact, let's move the camera a little bit. I'm not sure if you'll actually be able to see out the window because it is a bit bright out. But outside, hopefully you can see, there is nothing other than single unit family housing as far as the eye can see. And trust me, it goes farther. That's a little bent. Seriously, not just as far as the eye can see. You can't walk anywhere. I'm lucky that I live nearby a bus station if I really wanted to take a bus, but the buses within suburbs suck. They're really unreliable. Their timing's horrible. And also, I don't know any of my neighbors. I know one set of those neighbors. They're really nice. We were talking about having like a cooperative garden, a garden that feeds off of each other, and it'd be really nice. That'd be really nice. That sense of community. But I don't know any of my other neighbors. And I would have to go out of my way to like knock on their doors and go inside to meet them. We don't have any places nearby where we can congregate. I don't even think we have a park nearby. For the if any Europeans end up watching this, you're going to think that I'm fucking lying. Because all of you have a local pub you can go to. All of you have places you can walk to. I don't. There is nowhere within any conceivable distance that I can walk to. And that's by design. This entire system is made not only for the profits of car companies and the profits of suburban developers, because suburbs certainly aren't good for cities. They're absolute tax holes for cities. They definitely make a lot of money for developers. But the system is also made to isolate us, to treat us like individuals that can never interact. And that makes it harder for members of the proletariat to organize. The fundamental way that the proletariat can fight back against the system, can fight back against the bourgeois, can fight back against their employers and their shitty employment systems, is to organize and strike, to form unions and go on strike. Because the work of the proletariat is what defines the economy. We are, after all, the people that actually make the things, that actually produce the commodities. The bourgeois are just a parasite, an economic parasite. And they don't want us to realize that. They don't want us to talk with one another. They don't want us to organize as a community. And it's a lot easier to organize as a community when there is a sense of community, when there is a place that everybody can go to, when there's a place where everyone can talk with one another, where you can meet your neighbors. There's a reason that they've isolated us, because they fear our power. I'm going to have to go into a lot more on how cities are planned specifically to make socialist organization harder, to make it harder for members of the proletariat to talk with one another, how they're specifically built to isolate people within the West. You'll notice I'm looking out my window a lot because every time I do, it's just horrifying to me. Genuinely, I would consider the sheer amount of time and effort put into the death of the culture of the proletariat and the death of the community of the proletariat a form of genocide being committed by the wealthy and powerful. And it's a deliberate one. It was done by Republicans in the 1960s and conservatives in the 1960s as they started planning how cities should be built. And we just kind of let them because we didn't realize the sheer social harms of it. More than anything, I wish we could build communities. But we can't do that until the places we live are built for us. And that includes the economic systems. Fight hard. Stay safe.